I'm George
Today I want to
Soros.
discuss the
I'm
critical
94
importance
years
of
old.
global
I've
cooperation
made over
in
$20
addressing
billion
our most
in my
pressing
lifetime.
challenges.
And in
Today I
all
want to
those
discuss
decades
the
of
critical
investing,
importance of
I've
global
watched the same
cooperation in
tragedy play
addressing
out
our
over
most
and over
pressing
again.
challenges. Today I want to
99%
discuss the
of
critical
people will live
importance
their
of global
entire lives
cooperation in
regretting the
addressing
one
our most
investment they
pressing
never
challenges.
made.
Today I want to
Not
discuss
because
the
they couldn't
critical
afford
importance
it,
of global
not because they
cooperation
didn't
in
have the
addressing our
opportunity,
most pressing
not because
challenges.
they
Today I
lacked
want
the
to discuss the
information.
critical
They'll
importance of
regret
global
it because they
cooperation
were too
in
scared,
addressing
too
our most
conventional,
pressing
too
challenges.
worried about what
Today I
others
want to
might
discuss
think
the
to make
critical
the single
importance
most
of global
important financial
cooperation in
decision of their
addressing our
lives.
most pressing challenges.
This investment
Today I want to
isn't
discuss
what
the
you think
critical
it is.
importance of global
It's not a stock
cooperation
that went
in
up
addressing our most
1,000%.
pressing
It's not
challenges.
Bitcoin
Today I
or
want
real
to
estate
discuss
or
the
some
critical importance
revolutionary
of global
technology that made
cooperation
early
in
adopters
addressing our
wealthy
most
beyond their
pressing challenges.
dreams.
Today I
It's
want to
not a
discuss the
specific
critical
company or
importance of
fund or
global
asset class
cooperation
that I'm going
in
to reveal to
addressing
you
our
today.
most pressing
It's
challenges.
something much
Today I
more
want to discuss the
fundamental.
critical importance
Something
of
that
global
costs almost
cooperation
nothing
in
to
addressing
acquire,
our
but has the
most pressing
power to
challenges.
transform your
Today I want to
entire
discuss the critical
financial
importance
future.
of global
Something that
cooperation in
99%
addressing
of
our
people
most
avoid
pressing
because it seems
challenges.
too simple,
Today I want to
too
discuss the
obvious, or
critical
too
importance of
uncomfortable to
global
pursue.
cooperation
But
in
the
addressing
1%
our
who
most
make this
pressing
investment
challenges.
early,
Today
they
I want to discuss
consistently
the
become the
critical
people who
importance of
control
global
wealth
cooperation
instead of
in
being
addressing
controlled by
our
the lack
most
of it.
pressing
They
challenges.
become the
Today
people
I
who
want to
create
discuss the critical
opportunities
importance
instead
of
of
global
waiting for
cooperation
opportunities to
in
find them.
addressing our most
They
pressing
become the people
challenges.
who
Today I
understand
want to
money
discuss the
instead of
critical
being
importance of
mystified
global
by it.
cooperation in addressing our
Today I'm
most
going to
pressing
tell you what this
challenges.
investment
Today I
is,
want to
why
discuss the
almost
critical
everyone
importance of
avoids it,
global
and how you can
cooperation
join
in
the
addressing our
1% who
most
benefit
pressing
from what the
challenges. Today I want
99%
to discuss
refuse
the
to
critical
do.
importance of global
But first,
cooperation in
let me tell
addressing
you
our
about the
most
most
pressing
expensive
challenges.
mistake of
Today I
my
want to
early
discuss the
career,
critical importance
because
of
it taught
global
me the lesson that
cooperation
led
in
to this
addressing our
insight.
most pressing challenges.
It was
Today I want to
1956.
discuss the critical
I was
importance of global
26 years old,
cooperation in
working as a
addressing
trainee
our
at a
most
small
pressing
merchant bank
challenges.
in London.
Today I want to
I was
discuss the
earning
critical
$5
importance
per
of
week,
global
which was
cooperation
barely enough
in
to
addressing
survive in
our most
post-war
pressing
Britain.
challenges.
I
Today
was
I want to
hungry,
discuss the critical
ambitious, and
importance of global
completely ignorant about how
cooperation
money
in addressing
really
our most
worked.
pressing
I
challenges.
thought wealth came
Today I
from
want to
finding the
discuss the
right
critical
investments,
importance of
picking the
global
right
cooperation
stocks,
in
being in
addressing
the
our
right
most
place at the
pressing
right
challenges.
time.
Today I
I
want to
spent my
discuss the
evenings
critical
reading
importance
financial
of global
newspapers,
cooperation
studying
in
company
addressing our
reports,
most pressing
trying to
challenges.
identify
Today I want to
undervalued
discuss the
securities that
critical
would make me
importance of global
rich if I could
cooperation
just
in
scrape together
addressing
enough
our
money to
most
buy
pressing
them.
challenges. Today I want to discuss the
This was
critical
my
importance of
fundamental
global
mistake.
cooperation
I
in
was
addressing
focused on
our
finding
most
the
pressing
perfect
challenges.
external
Today I
investment
want to
when the
discuss the
most
critical
important
importance of
investment
global
was sitting right
cooperation
in front
in
of me,
addressing our
invisible
most
and
pressing
ignored.
challenges. Today I
One day,
want to
my boss
discuss the
called me
critical
into his
importance
office.
of global
A wealthy client
cooperation
wanted to
in
understand the
addressing our
emerging
most
markets in
pressing challenges.
post-war Europe.
Today I want to discuss
Nobody at
the
the firm
critical
had any
importance
real
of global
expertise in this
cooperation
area,
in
but the
addressing
client
our
was
most
willing to pay
pressing
a
challenges.
substantial fee for
Today I want to
research and
discuss the
analysis.
critical importance of global
My boss asked
cooperation
if I
in
thought I could
addressing
handle it.
our most pressing
Here was my
challenges.
choice.
Today I want
I
to
could
discuss
admit
the
that I
critical
didn't know
importance of
anything
global
about European
cooperation
emerging
in
markets
addressing our
and let
most
someone
pressing
else take
challenges.
the assignment. Or I could invest in learning everything. I needed to know to provide valuable insights to this client. Most people would have chosen option 1. It's safer. It's more honest about current capabilities. It doesn't risk failure or embarrassment. But I chose option 2. I spent the next 6 weeks investing every spare hour in understanding European markets, political developments, currency movements, and economic trends. I read everything I could find. I contacted economists, journalists, and business leaders. I taught myself skills I didn't have and knowledge I'd never needed before. The report I delivered was comprehensive, insightful, and valuable. The client was impressed. More importantly, I was no longer the same person who had taken the assignment 6 weeks earlier. I had invested in my ability to understand and analyze complex financial situations. That investment paid immediate dividends. Within months, I was handling more complex assignments, earning higher fees, building a reputation for expertise that hadn't existed before. But the real payoff came years later, when that foundation of knowledge and analytical skill enabled me to recognize opportunities that others missed, to take positions that others couldn't evaluate, to make decisions that others didn't have the confidence to make. This is the investment that 99% of people will regret not making, investing in their own financial education and analytical capabilities. Not buying a course or attending a seminar or reading a book. Those are just tools. I'm talking about the systematic, persistent, long-term investment of time and mental energy in understanding how money, markets, and economic systems actually work at a fundamental level. Most people treat financial education like entertainment. They read articles about hot stocks. They watch videos about market predictions. They listen to podcasts about successful investors. But they never invest seriously in developing their own ability to analyze opportunities, evaluate risks, and make independent decisions about money. They remain consumers of financial information instead of becoming producers of financial insight. This is why they'll regret it for the rest of their lives, because without this foundational investment, they're always dependent on others for financial decisions. They're always following advice instead of creating strategies. They're always reactive instead of proactive. They're always hoping for luck instead of creating opportunities. Let me give you an example of how this plays out in real life. In 1969, I met two young men at a dinner party in New York. Both were recent MBA graduates from top universities. Both had landed jobs at prestigious investment banks. Both were earning good salaries and seemed destined for successful careers in finance. The first man, let's call him David, was focused on climbing the corporate ladder. He worked long hours, impressed his bosses, got promoted regularly. He was making all the right moves within the system. The second man, let's call him Michael, was equally ambitious but took a different approach. He spent his evenings and weekends not socializing or relaxing, but studying. Not just finance, but psychology, history, political science, technology trends. He was investing in understanding the broader context in which financial markets operated. After 5 years, David was a vice president at his firm, earning a substantial salary. Michael had left his job to start his own investment fund with money from a few wealthy individuals who had been impressed by his insights and analytical abilities. After 10 years, David was a senior executive, well respected within his industry. Michael was managing hundreds of millions of dollars and had developed a reputation for identifying opportunities that others missed. After 20 years, David had reached the top of his profession, earning millions annually as a senior partner. Michael had built a multi-billion-dollar investment empire and was considered one of the most successful investors of his generation. What made the difference? Both men were intelligent, hard-working, and ambitious. Both had the same educational background and career opportunities. But Michael had made the investment that David never made. He had systematically developed his ability to understand and analyze complex situations independently. He had invested in becoming financially educated at a level that enabled him to see opportunities where others saw only confusion or risk. David had optimized his career within existing systems. Michael had developed the capability to create new systems. This is the choice that 99% of people face, and 99% of them choose David's path. Not because it's the wrong path, but because it seems safer and more conventional. It's the path that society rewards with steady paychecks, job titles, and social recognition. Michael's path required investing time and energy in developing capabilities that might never be recognized or rewarded by employers. It required learning things that weren't directly relevant to current job responsibilities. It required thinking independently about subjects that most people prefer to leave to experts. Here's what this investment in financial education actually looks like, and why most people avoid it, even though it costs almost nothing and can transform their entire financial future. First, it requires intellectual honesty about what you don't understand. Most people prefer to pretend they understand money and investing better than they actually do. They use sophisticated vocabulary and repeat conventional wisdom to avoid admitting that they don't really know how interest rates affect different types of investments, or why some countries have stronger currencies than others, or what causes inflation to accelerate or decelerate. Real financial education starts with making a list of everything you don't understand about money and markets, then systematically working through that list until you can explain each concept simply and clearly to someone else. This process is uncomfortable because it reveals the gaps in your knowledge that you've been avoiding or hiding, but it's also liberating because once you acknowledge what you don't know, you can start learning it. Second, it requires studying failure more than success. Most people only want to learn about successful investments, winning strategies, and positive outcomes. But the most valuable lessons come from understanding why smart people make terrible financial decisions, why successful strategies stop working, and why markets behave irrationally during periods of stress. I spent years studying every major financial crisis, every significant market crash, every spectacular investment failure I could research. Not because I enjoyed reading about disasters, but because these extreme situations revealed truths about human nature and market behavior that are invisible during normal times. Understanding why long-term capital management collapsed teaches you more about risk management than studying 1,000 successful trades. Understanding why intelligent investors lost everything during the dot-com crash teaches you more about valuation than reading about companies that performed well. Understanding why the housing bubble developed and burst teaches you more about economic cycles than following current market trends. Third, it requires developing your own analytical framework instead of adopting someone else's system. Most people want to be told what to do with their money. They want simple rules, clear recommendations, and guaranteed outcomes. They want someone else to take responsibility for their financial decisions. But real financial education means developing the ability to analyze situations independently and make decisions based on your own understanding rather than external advice. This doesn't mean ignoring expert opinions or historical data. It means developing the capability to evaluate that information critically and integrate it with your own observations and reasoning. It means being able to disagree with conventional wisdom when your analysis suggests it might be wrong. It means taking responsibility for your own financial outcomes rather than blaming advisors, market conditions, or bad luck when things go poorly. Fourth, it requires accepting that uncertainty is permanent and expertise is provisional. Most people want to believe that financial markets can be understood completely, that risks can be eliminated through proper analysis, that smart people with good information can predict outcomes reliably. Financial education means accepting that markets are complex adaptive systems driven by human behavior, political decisions, and unpredictable events. You can improve your ability to analyze situations and make good decisions, but you can never eliminate uncertainty or guarantee outcomes. This acceptance is crucial because it prevents the overconfidence that destroys so many intelligent investors who think they've figured out how markets work. Let me be specific about what this investment looks like in practical terms, because most people think financial education means reading investment books or taking finance courses. Those activities can be valuable, but they're not sufficient for developing the deep understanding that creates lasting wealth. Here's what serious financial education requires. First, spend at least 1 hour every day for 5 years studying how money and markets actually work, not reading news or market commentary, but studying fundamental concepts. How do central banks influence interest rates, and why does it matter? How do government fiscal policies affect different sectors of the economy? How do demographic trends influence long-term investment returns? How do technological changes create and destroy entire industries? How do psychological biases influence both individual and collective financial decisions? This isn't entertainment or casual reading. This is systematic study of subjects that most people find boring or intimidating. But these fundamental concepts determine how wealth is created and destroyed over long periods. Without understanding them, you're always operating with incomplete information about why markets move the way they do. Second, practice analyzing real situations without the benefit of hindsight. Every week, pick a company, industry, currency, or market that you know nothing about. Spend several hours researching it thoroughly, then write a detailed analysis of its current situation and future prospects. Save your analysis and review it 6 months or a year later to see how accurate your reasoning was. This practice develops the analytical skills that enable you to evaluate opportunities independently rather than relying on expert opinions or popular sentiment. It also teaches you to recognize the difference between good analysis and good luck when your predictions turn out to be correct. Third, study your own psychological responses to money and risk. Keep a detailed journal of every financial decision you make and every emotional reaction you have to market movements, investment performance, or money-related news. Most people make terrible financial decisions because they don't understand their own biases, fears, and irrational responses to financial stress. Real financial education includes developing self-awareness about your psychological relationship with money and learning to make decisions based on analysis rather than emotions. Fourth, network with people who understand money better than you do. Not for insider tips or investment recommendations, but for intellectual conversations about economic trends, market dynamics, and analytical frameworks. Most people's social networks include very few individuals who have deep understanding of financial markets or wealth creation. This limits their exposure to sophisticated thinking about money and reinforces conventional approaches that may not be optimal. Building relationships with financially sophisticated people exposes you to different perspectives and analytical approaches that can improve your own decision-making capabilities. Fifth, start making small investments based on your own analysis rather than external recommendations. Begin with amounts you can afford to lose completely and focus on learning from the process rather than maximizing returns. The goal is to develop practical experience in evaluating opportunities, managing risk, and dealing with the psychological pressures of having money at stake based on your own decisions. Most people never develop this practical experience because they either avoid investing entirely or only follow other people's advice. But you can't develop real financial competence without taking responsibility for actual investment decisions and learning from both successes and failures. This 5-part program requires approximately 2 hours of focused effort over 5 years. That might sound like a lot, but it's less time than most people spend watching television or browsing social media over the same period. And the return on this investment is potentially enormous. Now let me explain why 99% of people avoid making this investment, even though the benefits are so obvious and the costs are so manageable. The first reason is that our educational system doesn't prepare people for financial thinking. Most people graduate from high school and college without any meaningful understanding of how money, markets, or economic systems work. They can solve complex mathematical problems or write sophisticated essays, but they can't explain how inflation affects purchasing power or why some investments are riskier than others. This educational gap creates a psychological barrier. People assume that finance is too complex for them to understand without formal training or natural talent. They believe that successful investing requires special knowledge or connections that ordinary people don't have access to. But this isn't true. The fundamental concepts that drive financial markets are no more complex than the subjects taught in high school science or history. Classes. The problem is that these concepts aren't taught systematically in ways that help people understand practical applications to their own financial lives. The second reason is social pressure to follow conventional approaches to money management. Most people's friends, family members, and colleagues make financial decisions based on conventional wisdom. Save money in the bank, buy a house, invest in your company's 401k plan, hire a financial advisor for anything more complex. Anyone who deviates from this conventional approach by spending significant time learning about markets or making independent investment decisions is often viewed as obsessive, risky, or arrogant. It's easier to follow the same approaches as everyone else, even if those approaches produce mediocre results, than to invest the time and energy required to develop superior financial capabilities. The third reason is that the benefits of financial education are delayed and often invisible to others. When you spend years developing deep understanding of markets and investment analysis, the immediate payoff may be modest. You might make slightly better decisions about where to keep your savings or how to allocate your retirement contributions. But the real benefits compound over decades as your improved decision-making capabilities create opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. These long-term benefits are hard to see and difficult to attribute directly to your educational investment. It's easier to focus on immediate, visible activities that produce obvious short-term rewards, even if those activities don't contribute to long-term wealth building. The fourth reason is that serious financial education requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about money and wealth creation. Most people prefer to believe that wealth comes from luck, connections, inheritance, or exploitation rather than from superior understanding and decision-making capabilities. Investing seriously in financial education means accepting that your current financial situation is largely the result of your own decisions and capabilities rather than external circumstances beyond your control. This level of personal responsibility is threatening to people who prefer to blame their financial problems on the economy, their employers, the government, or wealthy people who supposedly have unfair advantages. The fifth reason is that developing real financial competence requires learning from failure and criticism rather than seeking confirmation of existing beliefs. Most people want their financial decisions to be validated by experts or supported by popular opinion. They want to feel smart and safe about their money choices. But real financial education often involves discovering that popular approaches are suboptimal, that expert recommendations serve the experts' interests more than the investors, and that safe-feeling strategies may actually be quite risky over long periods. This process of discovering uncomfortable truths about conventional financial wisdom is psychologically challenging for most people. Despite these psychological barriers, the 1% who do make this investment in financial education gain advantages that compound throughout their entire lives. Let me describe what happens when you develop real financial competence, because most people have never seen these benefits modeled by anyone in their social circle. First, you stop being afraid of financial decisions because you understand the underlying dynamics rather than just hoping for good outcomes. When markets crash, you can evaluate whether the decline represents a buying opportunity or a signal to reduce risk, rather than just panicking or freezing. When investment opportunities arise, you can analyze them independently rather than relying on sales presentations or marketing materials that may not reflect the actual risk-return characteristics. When major economic changes occur, you can adjust your strategies proactively rather than just reacting to whatever happens to your existing investments. This confidence comes not from arrogance or overconfidence, but from having a systematic framework for understanding and responding to financial situations. Second, you start recognizing opportunities that are invisible to people who lack financial education. These opportunities aren't insider tips or secret strategies. They're situations where your analytical capabilities enable you to see value or risk that others miss because they don't understand the underlying dynamics. Sometimes this means recognizing that a widely feared situation actually presents limited risk. Sometimes it means identifying emerging trends before they become obvious to the general public. Sometimes it means understanding why conventional approaches won't work in changing circumstances and developing alternative strategies before others realize the need for them. The key insight is that opportunities aren't distributed randomly. They're distributed based on the ability to recognize and evaluate them. People with superior financial education see more opportunities because they understand more about what to look for and how to evaluate what they find. Third, you become much more difficult to deceive or manipulate with financial products and services designed to benefit sellers more than buyers. The financial industry spends billions of dollars on marketing designed to make complex, expensive, and often unsuitable products seem attractive to consumers who lack the knowledge to evaluate them critically. When you develop real financial competence, you can see through this marketing and identify the actual costs, risks, and benefits of any financial product or service. This defensive capability alone can save you tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime by helping you avoid expensive mistakes that trap less educated consumers. Fourth, you can take advantage of other people's financial mistakes without exploiting or harming them. Markets are constantly creating opportunities for people who understand value to buy assets from people who need to sell quickly or don't understand what they own. Real estate markets regularly offer properties below intrinsic value from sellers who are motivated by circumstances rather than market analysis. Stock markets regularly offer shares of good companies at discounted prices when temporary problems create selling pressure from investors who don't understand the underlying business fundamentals. These opportunities exist because financial markets are not perfectly efficient. They're dominated by people who make decisions based on emotions, limited information, or flawed analysis. When you develop superior analytical capabilities, you can benefit from these inefficiencies without taking advantage of anyone's ignorance or desperation. Fifth, You can create value for others by solving financial problems that they can't solve themselves. Once you understand how money and markets work, you can help other people make better financial decisions, structure better investment strategies, and avoid expensive mistakes. This value creation often leads to business opportunities, consulting arrangements, or investment partnerships that wouldn't be available to people who lack financial expertise. The most successful people I know didn't just use their financial education to manage their own money better. They used it to create value for others, which became the foundation for building much larger fortunes than would have been possible through individual investing alone. Let me end with the most important insight from 7 decades of financial markets. The investment in financial education is the only investment that can never be taken away from you. Stock markets crash, real estate values decline, businesses fail, currencies devalue, governments confiscate assets, economic systems change. But the analytical capabilities and deep understanding you develop through serious financial education remain with you regardless of external circumstances. More importantly, these capabilities often become more valuable during periods of crisis and uncertainty when people with conventional approaches are paralyzed by fear or confusion. The 2008 financial crisis created enormous opportunities for people who understood what was happening and had the confidence to act while others were panicking. The COVID pandemic created similar opportunities for people who could evaluate the long-term implications of economic shutdowns and policy responses, while most investors were focused on short-term market movements. Every major economic disruption creates similar patterns. People with superior financial understanding benefit, while people who depend on conventional approaches suffer losses that often take years to recover from. This is why I believe that 99% of people will eventually regret not making this investment in their own financial education. Not because they couldn't afford to make it, but because they chose to spend their time and mental energy on activities that produced immediate gratification rather than long-term capability building. They chose entertainment over education, consumption over development, comfort over growth. The tragedy is that this choice seems rational in the short term. Spending your evenings watching television or socializing with friends produces immediate pleasure. Studying financial markets and economic systems requires effort and provides delayed gratification. Most people optimize for short-term comfort rather than long-term capability. But the compound effect of these daily choices becomes apparent over decades. The person who invests 2,000 hours over 5 years in developing real financial competence ends up in a fundamentally different position than the person who spends those same hours on activities that don't build lasting capabilities. The educated investor has options that the uneducated investor never discovers. They have confidence that comes from understanding rather than hope. They have the ability to create opportunities rather than just waiting for them to appear. They have independence from financial advisors, market gurus, and conventional wisdom that may not serve their interests. Most importantly, they have the satisfaction of knowing that their financial outcomes are the result of their own decisions and capabilities rather than luck, timing, or external circumstances beyond their control. This is the investment that 99% of people will regret not making: the systematic development of their own financial understanding and analytical capabilities. It costs almost nothing except time and mental effort. It's available to anyone, regardless of their current income, social background, or formal education. It produces benefits that compound over entire lifetimes and can never be lost or confiscated. But it requires choosing long-term capability, building over short-term gratification. It requires accepting responsibility for your own financial outcomes rather than hoping that others will solve your money problems. It requires intellectual honesty about what you don't understand and the discipline to systematically address those knowledge gaps. The choice is yours. You can join the 99% who avoid this investment because it seems too difficult, too time-consuming, or too uncertain. Or you can join the 1% who understand that developing your own financial competence is the most important investment you'll ever make. The regret of the 99% isn't about missing out on a particular stock or investment opportunity. It's about realizing too late that they spent their entire lives dependent on others for the most important financial decisions, never developing the capabilities that would have given them real control over their financial destiny. Don't let that be your regret. Make the investment that 99% avoid and join the 1% who truly understand money.